You're listening to Pri-Zen, Life Lessons from Lockup. I'm Courtney Stewart. I'm a journalist, and I've been covering criminal justice issues in Virginia for 20 years.
I'm Jesse Crossan. I've been incarcerated since 2002, and we're here to share stories and experiences and perspective from one of the more than 2 million people incarcerated nationwide.
Hello, this is a prepaid debit call from...
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. Yourself?
I am doing very well today. Thank you. So we are going to talk about relationships today and the importance of connection in rehabilitation and just in the whole experience of being in prison. And so I just thought we'd kick off with that. Certainly when you get arrested and get put into jail, there's a disconnect that happens. So I thought just start with that.
Yeah. So there is. I mean, being arrested, going to jail involves being cut off from everything that we've known, which can be both good and bad, at least at the time. Because prison as a whole, the idea is to kind of strip away the destructive or negative behaviors and build more positive ones. You know, jail is just kind of a temporary housing place, but prison in theory is about like rebuilding people, rebuilding them with better patterns or better habits. So when they initially strip away, you know, if I'm running around with people who are all shooting cocaine, well, being away from them is probably a good thing. It's probably helpful in the short term of at least removing me as a threat from society or a threat to society, as well as removing away from those people. But then there needs to be that kind of coming back together and rebuilding. So if I'm, you know, constantly surrounded by good people, by my parents and my friends and you know, people who are positive community members, well, being away from them is a problem. And the goal is to then foster communication, foster connection, because that's what helps us change. Because I think you've said this before, that without other people, we just fall apart. Like, no matter whether we're in prison, we're out on the street, it doesn't matter where we are, we need people. Relationships are hugely important in the human condition. And without them, we just do not do well in life.
So in terms of being in touch with family and the people that are positive influences and that want to support you, it's not really that easy to keep those connections alive. I mean, it can be both time consuming and expensive. And so, I mean, there's different ways that people stay in touch in non-pandemic times. I mean, there is visitation, but there's also phone and email. So I thought maybe just talk a little bit about each of those and how they work and what the challenges are.
So there's a huge disparity in how resources are made available based on the prison, as well as based on kind of the availability based on a person's economic well-being. Phone calls are anywhere from 86 cents to $1.04 or $1.06 or something if they're out of state. They're 20 minutes long, and they're paid for either by the prisoner or by the person receiving the phone call. In the dormitory where I'm at, we have 80 people and we have 4 phones. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of competition for the phones. The place that I came from, we had 32 people in the honor pod and 5 phones. So you go from one phone for 6 people, where I literally never once had to wait in line, to one phone for 20 people, where I've never not waited in line. It's kind of a crazy disparity. But it does. It allows people to call and to connect and to, be involved in people's lives. And it is better than when I first got locked up, when local phone calls were $7 and something, and out-of-state phone calls were like $15.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's significantly better than it used to be.
The cost, I mean, even now, I mean, it's, like you said, it's much better, but I see that as really being a problem because it separates people once again into the haves and have-nots, and some people have family members for whom that's just no big deal, and you would have no problem paying for that. But if somebody comes in, you know, and is coming out of a low-income family or lower socioeconomic status, that person is at a disadvantage in something as basic as staying in touch with their loved ones.
Absolutely. I mean, everything in prison is monetized, unfortunately. Mail is probably the most equitable thing that remains, because you can buy a stamp for 55 cents and send mail in. So mail is one of the other options, you know, physical mail. But anything that's sent to us, it can't be more than 5 single-sided pages. It is all copied into black and white, and then the originals are shredded, and we're given the copies in black and white. So it's kind of heartbreaking. I have a buddy who's been a really good father while he's been in prison, and his daughter used to always send her homework, but also her drawings. And he can't get her drawings anymore because they're going to be shredded, and he's going to get black and white copies. You know, he can't get physical photographs anymore because they're going to be shredded, and he's going to get black and white copies. So the mail is still there, but the kind of goodness or the connection of that has been taken away. Then an alternative is email, where you can get photos that are then going onto the kiosk or onto your tablet, essentially the thing you can buy for $50 if you have the money. But those stamps cost anywhere from 25 cents to 50 cents. So imagine basically you're sending a text for 50 cents. And if you want to include a picture, you're sending a picture for 50 cents or for 25 cents if you buy them in bulk. And And there are all kinds of delays and there are all kinds of issues. I've had photos turned down because they were upside down, which was apparently a security concern, and I had to go through this long grievance process to get them approved. It's just pretty onerous. And again, it's costly because if somebody wants to stay in constant contact, imagine if you had to pay a quarter for every text you sent in a day. Think about what cost would accumulate, especially if, like you said, you're coming from a poor family or a poor area, or you're trying to pay for this on prisoners' wages, which is 27 to 45 cents an hour if you're lucky enough to have a job.
Yeah, it really does seem to be a big problem. So let's see, there's email through the JPay system, there's the phones, then in-person visitation, I guess, talking about how it's been during the pandemic, but just prior to the pandemic, visitation is, the opportunity to see your family and your loved ones in person. And that is, that seems like it would be incredibly important. That is also sort of fraught with issues from reporting that I've done and people that I talk to about problems. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then maybe we'll jump into what it's been like during the pandemic.
Sure. So, visitation in person really is huge. And it's the thing that it has the strongest correlation with success upon release. People who consistently get visits consistently stay out of prison when they're released. There's no question about that. It's undeniable and it's huge. So encouraging visitation is therefore going to encourage positive relationships, which is going to encourage people to get out of prison. Visitation is more complicated. When a visitor walks in, they go through a scanning machine and they're subject to a strip search if anything is determined. And I've had my 84-year-old father strip search. So my 84-year-old grandfather. Imagine your 84-year-old grandfather being asked to remove all his clothing and to squat and cough and to spread his cheeks and do all these completely dehumanizing things. And then the worst part is, after he goes through that, he doesn't even get to see me in person. He has to have a non-contact visit. So imagine being strip searched and humiliated by guards and then being told, oh, even after you went through this, you still cannot see the person you came to see in person. You did a story on a woman who came all the way from Germany to see somebody, was strip searched, and still could not see her visitor in person, which is just mind-boggling and insane.
I don't understand. I still don't understand the reasoning behind that because, my recollection is that, different things could set off the metal detector. It could be, not that you have contraband. It could be that you have, I don't know, like a hip replacement or, something could set it off. And that even after they strip search you, I can see the humiliation and how horrible that is. But then why, after you have been strip searched, would you still not be allowed to see the person you just traveled many hours or in her case, overseas to come visit? I don't get that.
I don't either. I don't think it's justifiable. And as we saw, there was a big story in the news where they strip searched an 8-year-old girl without her parents' consent. That caused finally a reaction where they said, hey, wait a minute, maybe we're going a little too far. But it's horrible that it took that for them to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be strip searching children. Maybe something is wrong here. And it's incredibly frustrating. But again, even after that process, if you go through and it does go smoothly, I remember at the last time we were having regular visitation, people were getting strip searched 10 or 15 people a weekend. That's 10 or 15 people, a weekend day. So 10 or 15 people not getting in to see their families. So you're going up and you're basically playing Russian roulette with whether you're going to get strip searched and stuck in a non-contact visitation room or actually get to see your family. And then if you do actually get in to see your family, you're going to see your visitor dressed in this brown potato sack, unable, and orange clogs, which are it's insane. Not dressed in any kind of normal human way, but at least you do. You get that time, and you get that kind of face-to-face contact, and that's huge. It's incredibly important. After all of that, the people that have come to see me, people who have even endured those strip searches and still been willing to come see me, that's amazing. I cannot think of a more validating thing of who I am that someone is willing to risk that just to come spend a few hours with me in an incredibly controlled and limited situation. That alone, it creates an incredible feeling of love and support, and it does kind of build almost a trauma bond. The situation is so horrible and so traumatic that you kind of bond over the trauma of it, and you end up either laughing about it or crying about it. It's frustrating, but again, we haven't had visits. We haven't had in-person visits since March of 2020. So I haven't seen my grandfather, seen my mother, seen any of my friends in person since then.
And so this past year, it's clearly been devastating, really around the world for everyone. But the experience in prison has been sort of particularly amplified because you're already isolated, even just in normal times, and then to have this completely shut down. What have you seen as the impact of this total shutdown of visitation and basically on programming?
It's been devastating. To warehouse people 23 hours a day, for an hour of the day. You basically see people who have either drawn into their shells and are just trying to sleep their time away, or drink their time away, or stay high, their entire time. People have just lost the will to go out and do anything more. People have lost a sense of connection. I mean, we've had suicides during the pandemic. It's been horribly traumatic, and I know that part of that is just the pandemic itself. Part of that is that the world has been suffering, and that people throughout the world have been suffering, and that addiction and that mental health issues have gone through the roof outside as well. In here, it's unfortunate because every staff member that I've talked to has said this is horrible and this isn't working and we need to do something about this. But no one has done that. The warden who was here before, who left, I'll give him at least one thing he said. He turned the lights down. He said, "We're going to play you guys more movies. We're going to give you guys more phone calls. We're going to do what we can. We're going to try to make this more bearable because we understand it's horrible." And then as soon as a new warden gets here, he says, no, we're going to give you fewer phone calls. We're actually going to have the phones on for a shorter period of time, and we're going to limit the number of calls you can make. We're going to take away rated R movies because even though you're in prison and some of you guys have life sentences, we don't believe you should be able to watch a rated R movie. We're going to basically limit everything. And it doesn't make sense. There's been no approach whatsoever to provide any kind of structure or programming or sense of sanity. The one positive thing was they did these wellness videos, which were supposed to be done by staff as well as prisoners to provide educational opportunities and programming, different ideas. And I was fortunate enough to do a couple Spanish classes where statewide I was being able to teach people, hey, here's some basics of Spanish, and we were supposed to go further on that. But as soon as I got shipped to this new institution, no one can help, or no one is interested in helping to continue to make videos. So when I was at Buckingham, and it was wonderful because the psychologist there was the coordinator of that committee. Well, yeah, we had lots of people making videos, showing how to make food, showing different family programming, doing all kinds of things. And as soon as I get here, just nobody's interested. So it kind of stalled out. It's been really, really devastating.
Well, hopefully, I mean, I think, it's hard to know. There's, at the point that we're recording this, we don't know when things are going to reopen, but I certainly am hopeful that things are moving back towards something resembling normal, and hopefully that will include in-person visits and a return to, more programming and more structure. So hopefully that's not too far off.
Hope so as well.
Back to just connection and meeting people. I mean, when you go into prison, obviously you have all the people that you knew before you got there, and those people, hopefully you're going to be able to stay in touch with some of them. But in terms of meeting new people, or connecting with people outside of the institution, there are a couple of ways that you do that, and one of them is Penpals. So can you talk about that and just what that experience is like, and what who you've met through that process?
So, a lot of the people I've known, I've met through my mother, through family members. But some of the best friends that I have, I've met through pen pal sites and through different organizations. So there's these prison pen pal sites and Write a Prisoner that are designed to basically connect people outside with people inside. And the motivations can be varied, the kind of experiences can be varied, but I found it overall to just be an incredible experience. I've met some really neat people. Especially during the pandemic, right now, you have people that essentially feel like they're in prison at home who are reaching out to connect with somebody who says, who can relate to this, who can understand this, and then it's developed this tremendous sympathy for people who've been in prison, experiencing this for years. This isn't that it started in March of last year. That this started, for me, 18 and a half years ago. For some people, 25, 30 years ago. So we understand the sense of isolation and being cut off. So I think probably the most kind of extreme or bizarre story is I received a letter from a woman in Egypt. This was, 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe not that long, I can't remember for sure. And just this amazingly interesting woman, and we just kind of exchanged letters, and then ended up exchanging emails, and ended up talking on the phone. And so it started as just a random letter from someone, thousands and thousands of miles away, ended up turning into this very intimate relationship, and ended up turning into phone calls, and then bizarrely ended up turning into her receiving an internship in D.C. and being close by, and turned into in-person visits. So what started as a letter from thousands of miles away in northern Africa ended up in this very intimate relationship and contact, like physical contact with somebody who has ended up all the way over here. And it's just an example of the kind of bizarre coincidences that happen and can seemingly come out of nowhere.
So yeah, and that was a question that I've had for you, and I have found it really interesting, just how when you're only communicating with somebody through writing or phone, how do romantic relationships work in prison? I mean, you hear about people falling in love all the time with prisoners, and clearly it's not the same method that people use on the outside, where you can get together and have a date or do things in person.
No, but interestingly, I think the pandemic has kind of brought a leveling in that, because Because I've talked to a lot of people who have, rather than going out for drinks or going out to do things together, have actually developed relationships with people by getting to know them and spending time talking and spending time writing and spending time exchanging ideas. And they talk about this incredible feeling of connection and this kind of unfulfilled romance and desire and love, and that they can't wait for the restrictions to lift, or they couldn't wait before for restrictions to lift. And when they met the person in person, there was just this kind of like firework experience. And I think that that's mostly what it's about. It's about developing intimacy. It's about finding a person that you want to talk to. And when you realize you want to talk to somebody every day, and there's a difference between the person you want to talk to, your friend from middle school, and the person you want to talk to who's the first person you think of when you share something with, the first person you want to call when you're having a hard time, the first person you want to call when you have good news. I mean, as you develop those relationships, it can be really amazing. It can be intimate and intense in a way that I think most people out in the world don't recognize or don't experience or don't appreciate, because we also have the time to kind of sit back and really see what's important and think about what's important and really examine, because we're not distracted by everything else going on. We're not distracted by sex and immediate gratification and this kind of buffet mentality of, oh, well, this is great, but I can find something else. There's a sense of you see someone for who they are, and you sit in front of them, or even if not physically, you sit in front of them and you listen to their voice and you hear their words, and you can develop these amazingly intimate and meaningful connections. And it's really been a blessing. As much as I wish this whole experience had never happened, I can say that the appreciation I have for intimate connections and relationships that has come from it is something that I'm incredibly grateful for.
It's really the anti-Tinder.
Yeah, exactly. It's the anti-Tinder. Yeah, because even there are no conjugal visits in Virginia, so even when you do develop this amazing connection, even if you do decide to get married, which people do all the time, there still is no sex in the equation, or at least no physical sex.
In terms of that, I mean, you described 4 phones for 80 people in a dormitory environment. How do people connect intimately? How does that possibly work?
Well, you get a hug and a kiss upon entry of physical visitation, if there is physical visitation, and then a hug and a kiss upon leaving. But for more intimate encounters, it's mostly going to be over the phone. So you have, the 1980s phone sex lines are now your connection to reality. And as you get to know somebody, that's the only way to really connect. I mean, it can be an incredibly intimate experience, but at the same time, for the person in prison, they're sitting 2 feet away from somebody who may be doing the same thing, or maybe screaming at somebody, or maybe, farting and scratching their leg, or it's this bizarre juxtaposition of incredible intimacy and just a complete lack of privacy and humanity.
So before we run out of time, I want to touch on this idea that when you're in prison long term, I mean, I think people think of like Orange is the New Black as a prison experience, and obviously you're in a men's prison, but do relationships develop between people in there? I mean, what is that dynamic?
1 minute remaining.
Sure. Sometimes they do. I mean, we had a couple in here that was very serious, and there was all kinds of drama because one member of the couple was kind of running out on the other one and involved in other people, and then they would come back together because they were housed separately, and then they were housed together, and then one of them ended up getting transferred, and the other had a picture of them on their bunk, and it's an interesting dynamic, and it does happen. And sometimes it's incredibly meaningful and beautiful, and other times it's incredibly unhealthy and purely physical and even abusive. I mean, it runs the gamut just like relationships do on the outside.
Well, this has been super interesting as usual, and I think we are out of time. So before this call ends, thanks, and I hope you have a great day.
You too. Bye, Courtney.
Bye, Jesse.
Thank you for using GTL.